great to be here. I know you're all here to talk about Pokemon tonight, right? So that's why you've come tonight. I'm so excited to talk about that issue. Anyway, it's wonderful to be with you. I do know someone in your congregation. My main contact is Rob Mitchell. He's sitting over here. Rob is an old friend, so we've known each other for years. So I told him that if anyone has any complaints about me, they need to go to him, and he'll go to Rick. So it all goes from Rob to Rick. But anyway, I live just outside the Bexley area, and I took off early to get here tonight because of the traffic. So I'm thankful that God got me here safely. And I do have a PowerPoint tonight. Now, I think what we'll do, Rick's handing out a small outline. He's giving kind of a Word doc that has some of the points I'm going to be talking about on the slides. If you really want to copy this PowerPoint, though, if you give me your email afterwards, that's fine. I can email it to you or any of the PowerPoints of the next few weeks. So it's not going to be a problem. You're not burdening me or anything. Or you can just email me. My email address will be on here on the second slide. But I'll be happy to pass on the actual slides if you really want them. So don't worry about it. If you look at something, you're like, man, I'd really like to go over that in deeper detail, more detail, go ahead and contact me. My email address is not up there, but anyway. So I'll have it next week. If not, you can just give me your own email address, and I'll compile them together and send you out everything. So it is on there. Okay, that's right. It's on the Word doc. Great. Okay, covered that. All right, well, a little bit about myself. I do have a seminary degree from Southern Evangelical Seminary. That is down in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm trying to work on some more graduate work. As you know, life happens, and it depends how much time you have to do anything. I do also have a relationship with Cross Examine. That's Frank Turek's ministry. Is anybody familiar with Frank Turek? He wrote I Don't Know Faith to Be an Atheist. You guys familiar with that book? Okay. Well, I'll show something about it in a second. But anyway, so I am one of his instructors, local instructors. So I sometimes do his presentation locally if someone wants it done, because he comes and does it at Ohio State, which I'll talk about in a second. I came to Christ in 1994. I was not raised, probably I would say, in an overly religious background. I mean, I was certainly raised with some aspects of the church, but I probably didn't know really what I believed completely till about the age of 24, where I really was confronted, trying to figure out exactly where I stood with God. So that's when I really gave my life to the Lord at age 24. And then about 2005, I started going down to the Ohio State University. I have to say the all the time. I go in other cities, they're like, it's the. Anyway. And that's where I really began to develop a lot more of the evangelistic skills. I had been doing a lot of outreach and been challenged in my faith. But once I got down to campus, I realized, well, this is a whole different ballgame here. I mean, these are people from all different walks of life, different religions, atheists, agnostics, and they had a lot of questions and objections. So probably about 2009, we planted this chapter here on the bottom there. It says Director of Ratio Christi. Ratio Christi is really an apologetics ministry, and it means reason for Christ, and we have chapters all across the country now. But I really saw the need on the campus for a greater apologetics presence to help students kind of get some answers to their questions, to get confidence and to know what they believe and why they believed, and to really counter some of the, some of the big atheists are writing books right around then, 2008, 2009. So atheism was really in the spotlight. I mean, it still kind of is, but not as much as it was right then. So we planted this chapter there, and now we're like the fourth chapter. Now there's like 150 of them. But actually, the main organization that I really work for, it's not, I don't know why. Oh, yeah, it's down there on the bottom. It says Speaking Experience Midwest Representative for CGF Ministries. CGF Ministries is foundation, but now they call it CJF for short. And really, we have an outreach, an expertise on reaching Jewish people. So I have a very long background in doing Judaism and Jewish objections to our faith and reaching out to the Jewish community as well. So this all kind of works together, all one thing. So I do a lot of ministry on the campus and also do a lot of speaking in different churches. You can check out my blog. I think it's kind of cut off on the bottom there. It says thinkapologetics.com. There's certainly plenty of information on there if you want to get more resources. I try to keep putting new information on there regularly. Okay. So that's a little bit about me. I do have some other slides, and I just want to show you a couple of the events, a few of the events we've done at Ohio State. Yeah, keep it there. These are just a couple events we've done in the past. Like there was an event we did called Can We Detect Design in the Natural Sciences? That was really an event on science on the campus because there's a lot of people, obviously, who think science is the only way of knowing anything. So we did this event there. Then we had the resurrection event. That's the one on the right there. We did a lecture on evidence for the resurrection. And then that is my family there. That's my wife Lucy in the middle, my kids Jack and Elise. Just want to make sure you saw that. Do you have the other slide with the, go back? Is there one before? Yeah, there you go. Thanks. Here's a couple other events we've done. The first one on the left, that's a lecture on the existence of God. And then on the right, you of course can see the event, I Don't Have Faith to Be an Atheist. We've done that event several times on the campus. That's been a big draw. Obviously, the title itself is provocative, and students hear about it. They're like, what is this? I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. The atheists hate it. But, of course, the Christians find it interesting. But so anyway, you can, if you stay in touch with me, if you want to email me or go to my blog, I put the events on there, what's going to be coming up. I actually have Frank coming back in the fall. He's going to do November this year. He's going to do I Don't Have Faith to Be an Atheist. So if you want to bring some people that do that, Rob has done that on several occasions. He's brought people, and I think he's enjoyed it, so you can talk to him about it. So these are some of the things we do at Ohio State. I just want to give you a little background about myself. Now, if you go to this slide here, I just want to mention a few things. Whenever I teach something on apologetics, I generally have people that come to me and say, do you have any resources? What do you suggest? Where do I begin? I mean, a lot of people are like, I just haven't really got into this topic a lot. I haven't read a lot on it. I know there's questions out there, and I hear questions and objections to our faith, but where do I start? Well, I would say if you can read through these 4 books as a starting point, or at least kind of try to get through one of them a year, or I don't know what your schedule's like, everyone's busy, but this is kind of like a good starting point, some of these books up here. I mean, there's many, many, many more. I could give you a long bibliography, but I think these 4 right here are pretty good starting points. So if you kind of want to get going more on the topic and, just kind of dive in, check out those books there. I think there's enough in there to kind of whet your appetite, okay? All right. Okay, so let's go ahead. What we're going to do is tonight, we're going to talk about some of the issues about what apologetics is and some of the confusion about it in the church today. And then also we're going to talk about the existence of God. And then next week, we will talk about religious pluralism, whether there's only one way to God. And we're going to tie that in with Islam a little bit, whether we are worshiping the same God as Muslims do, which is a hot topic today. And we'll kind of tie that all in together because that's always a big topic. Are we really saying there's only one way to God, and is that arrogant? Is it exclusive? How do we deal with that in a very diverse and pluralistic culture? And then the third week, you're going to have to wait. Then we're going to kind of dive into that gay topic. I know that's not on your minds at all. But anyway, so we'll definitely dive into that the third week. So tonight we're just going to focus on some of the basics of apologetics and then God's existence. Well, one of the reasons I got involved in apologetics was some of these reasons right here. When I became a believer in 1994, I really, really was excited about the gospel. And I really wanted to share my faith with a lot of people. I mean, I was somewhat just overly zealous to a certain extent. I just couldn't wait. I was like, hey, you can have a relationship with God. What more could you want? So I just went around and talked to people about it and tried to get in conversations. Well, it wasn't very long before I realized a lot of people didn't believe what I believed, and they had a lot of objections to Christianity. So, I had a lot of Jewish friends. I still do. They had a lot of objections. I heard it from family members or skeptics. There's just people that didn't believe what I believe. So I kind of think that part of the thing that fuels our desire, hopefully, for wanting to learn some of the basics for apologetics is that we want to be engaged in the culture around us. So we want to be engaged talking to other people about our faith or just getting in conversations with friends in general or coworkers. So we want to be engaging people. So just some basics here. Of course, we need to see ourselves as ministers of reconciliation. We're all called to do that. You don't have to be a clergy member to do that. We're all called to reach out with a message of reconciliation. Generally, God reaches most people by using us. He uses us as messengers. That's his main vehicle to reach somebody. I don't know why, but he chooses to use us. So That's a nice thing for him to do that. Very gracious of him. And of course, Jesus commands us to make disciples in Matthew 28. Somebody generally needs to hear about the gospel before they can become a disciple, right? Most people generally don't walk up to you and say, hey, how can I be a disciple of Jesus? Generally, out of nowhere, you have to explain the gospel to them verbally. And then, of course, if we really have come to know the Lord, the Spirit of God is in us, and he wants to help us and empower us to proclaim the gospel. That's what the main reasons he's there is to proclaim the risen Christ. And then, of course, lastly, we always want to obey God and leave the results to him. I know sometimes we get focused on results and we get discouraged, but God is more interested in our faithfulness than anything else. Okay. Now, when it comes to apologetics, sometimes there's a lot of confusion about that word. I know that some of us may think it's about apologizing for being a Christian, right? You hear that? I got to apologize for being a follower. And Eric's going to come and talk to us about that. When I first heard this word, I was like, what is that word, apologetics? Sounds so bizarre. But actually, it is in the Bible. It is, apologetics is used in many, many places. You see, obviously, throughout the book of Acts, the early followers of Jesus were constantly trying to persuade and witness and provide a defense for what they believed. Paul, of course, was always reasoning with his audience in the synagogues and with the Greeks. And really, apologia means to give reasons or make a legal defense. So it's kind of like if I was in a courtroom right now and all of you decided to say to me, Eric, give me your best case for Christianity in 20 to 30 minutes or whatever, and I would just have to sit here and kind of go on and give you my case. I'd have to make a case for what I believe. So I think everybody probably does apologetics without even knowing it, even though you may be confused by the word. But how many people here have talked about Christianity to others and the person has had a lot of questions? How many people here today? Give me the hands. Almost everybody, right? Very, very rarely do you talk to somebody anymore where they say, oh, yeah, Christianity, the gospel, Jesus, yeah, I just want to believe today, and that's it. It can happen. It does happen sometimes, but it's becoming a very rare thing for somebody that first time just to hear it and say, I want that, I want to believe in it. I hope it happens, but my experience is showing me more and more that people have questions almost every single time, okay? So we're clear on the definition of the term, all right? Keep going. Right, next. And this is a really, really good quote by Tim Keller. He's a very provocative writer. He says here, apologetics is an answer to the why question after you've already given people an answer to the what question. The what question, of course, is what is the gospel, but when you call people to believe in the gospel, then they ask, why should I believe that? Then you need apologetics. So just like I said, you can actually say this is the gospel, this is what it is, but then on many occasions people say, well, why is that true, or why should I believe that, right? So the what and the why go together, okay? Sometimes people confuse evangelism and apologetics. I've run into this a lot. Sometimes when you try to teach apologetics or try to tell people why they need to learn it, someone will say, well, you just need to give people the gospel. The gospel is what changes the human heart. The gospel needs to penetrate their hearts. Well, that's true. But remember, you don't want to confuse the two. There's a relationship between the two. But remember, apologetics is defending the faith, providing those questions people have. And of course, evangelism is just simply sharing the good news, okay? So they go hand in hand. Most likely, as I said, you'll be sharing the gospel, and then the person will have questions, then you're doing apologetics. So they're kind of interwoven together, all right? Don't want to get those confused, though. I hope you can just share the gospel. You have to do apologetics. Most of the time, you do have to do apologetics, okay? All right, so let's go into a little bit here on some of the issues of believing. Now, when I became a Christian in 1994, believe it or not, I really no apologetics. I didn't have a ton of questions. I wasn't a huge skeptic. I believed in God. I was not an atheist. I was raised to believe in Jesus, even though I didn't really know what the gospel was. And I came to faith really just through hearing the gospel. I was one of those people, someone preached in a church, the congregation, I was sitting in the back, it penetrated me, and I came to faith. I'm a very rare breed this day and age. That was a long time ago. But as I went on, and I began to examine my faith, really what I believed, these kinds of things came up. So, why do we believe what we believe? Some people believe things today, or they're Christians because of sociological reasons, like it says up here. You could be a Christian because of culture, friends, parents, obviously. There's nothing wrong with these things. Sometimes there's psychological issues. Your faith provides comfort, hope, or meaning, peace of mind. And of course, there's religious authorities that have had an influence on you. Like I heard the gospel from my current pastor right now. That's how I came to faith. But these are some of the reasons why people believe what they believe. I would say today that the main reason most people tell me they are Christians is because of a personal religious experience they've had through the work of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, which isn't a bad thing. I'm not saying we don't need that because it is in the Bible. But, it becomes kind of challenging when you try to present that to people who don't believe when you go out there into the culture. Like, for example, let's look at what Bobby Conway says here in his book, Doubting Towards Faith. There's a difference between feeling certain and being certain. He says here, but Bobby, I feel 100% certain that Christianity is true. You may contest, and I would add, we cannot confuse feeling certain and being certain. There's a difference. Mormons also feel certain that their beliefs are true, as do Mormons, atheists, and many others. Feeling certain and being certain aren't necessarily equivalent. As we all know, feelings are fickle. One day your moods may sing the praises of your faith, and the next day your moods will betray you, drowning you in the despair of doubt. The reality is, even those who feel 100% certain can't prove Christianity with 100% certainty, and we do the church a great disservice when we act like we can. Not to mention, we also set new believers up for a future doubt crisis when they realize things in our faith aren't as tidy as they once thought. Now, I would say from my personal experience that this quote is true 100%. I mean, I've seen it. I've witnessed to Mormons on the campus. I've witnessed to Muslims. I've witnessed to people of different religious backgrounds, particularly Mormons. If you ever witnessed to Mormons, their faith is all based on experience, religious experience, really no evidence at all. We run into this issue sometimes where you're witnessing or talking to other people from different backgrounds that have these experiences, and it's kind of like your experience against their experience, right? So now you've got an issue. Who's got the right experience and the right God? So, we just want to realize experience is okay. It's a good thing. But, if we rely on only experience alone, our emotions may kind of be like, woo, up and down. And, we run through the ups and downs of life. And we want to realize, that we need some good reasons behind our experience, for what we believe, why we believe, okay? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Okay. Now, this passage here is relevant today. Maybe you guys are familiar with it from 2 Corinthians 10:3-5, a very important text where Paul says here, for though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take every thought captive and obedient to Jesus, or the Messiah Christ. So Paul talks about here about arguments. This is really, you're talking to people these days about the gospel. There's all kinds of worldviews out there. There's different idea structures that have been built into the society today. And these strongholds certainly get in the way of sharing the gospel. These things are real. They're everywhere. And, Paul says here we're called to demolish arguments. We're called to give answers to these arguments. We don't want to, run away from the fact that, people have different worldviews. You need to understand our worldview, their worldviews, and talk about some of the issues here, okay? All right. And of course, as I said, we are in the war of ideas. So if you don't think we're in the war of ideas, I don't know where you've been living lately. So this is the day that we are definitely in a battle zone of idea structures, and the way people think are very diverse and very different from ours, and we have to know the way the culture thinks, okay? One little illustration here, maybe I use this kind of an illustration of apologetics. When you're talking to somebody, those walls go up in the middle there, and you're trying to get them to the gospel. God uses us to, as we give answers or provide, hopefully, reasonable answers to people. Hopefully, he knocks down some of those walls, as the ultimate goal is to get them to the gospel. The goal is always to get them to the gospel, obviously. But, God will use us if we're willing and able, to, provide resources and answers to some of those objections, okay? All right. So let me go into a couple other things here about apologetics. So I think we've gotten the idea that apologetics definitely is supposed to give us some ability and help in our outreach. It's hopefully going to provide some commitment level, bolsters commitment level, confidence, provide some answers for us. People have questions, of course. So, what I want to talk a little bit also is about this issue of how apologetics helps us on an in-reach level, because I think you guys are all pretty much, hopefully by now, understanding that apologetics can help your evangelism and your discussions with people, but there is an issue of inreach in the church that we need to address. Now, I would say that many of the people I've seen over the years at Ohio State that left the Christian church, which are many, not everybody, but some have left. One of the main reasons they have left, as I've talked to them over the years, is the fact that they had questions about what they believe and why they believed, and they either felt they were shot down in church. I'm not stereotyping anybody here today, I'm just telling you my experience. They were shot down in the church for asking questions, or nobody had any answers. I mean, they maybe have gone to their parents, because the parents are supposed to be the first resource, right? Parents didn't have any answers, and the local congregation didn't have any answers. But, when it comes to doubt, we need to understand that the Bible's filled with people with doubts. I mean, I don't know if you've read the Bible. People struggle with all kinds of doubts in different places. But I think if you're going to live in this culture, you're going to have some doubt at some point, unless you're denying it or you're in self-denial. There's all kinds of doubts. It could be emotional doubt. God could seem kind of distant from us. You've prayed and there's unanswered prayer. Sometimes it might be factual doubt, where you don't know, can I trust the Bible? Or, what are some of the answers about Jesus' resurrection? Or how do I know God exists? Or just some factual issues you may have. But the point of the matter is, I just want to say it's okay to doubt. Now, you may say to yourself, well, doubt's a sin. Not necessarily in the Bible. Doubt's not a sin, right? The only kind of doubt that's really a sin in the Bible is where we maybe just completely, we're not trusting God in anything. Where we completely, it's an unbelief issue where we're rejecting God, and I won't trust Him at all, where it's a continual pattern. But God doesn't condemn, asking questions. And when John the Baptist went to Jesus in Matthew chapter 11, Jesus is supposed to be the promised Messiah, and he says to them, are you the expected one, or should I look for somebody else? Here I am in prison. I'm going to be beheaded, and I heard you're the Messiah, but yet what's going on? I'm in prison and I'm struggling. Are you really the Jewish Messiah? Are you the expected one? I mean, John is asking some really hard questions here. He's having some challenges. So I could go through all kinds of examples in the Bible, but the point of the matter is that the church definitely needs to be a place that we provide resources for these issues, okay? We need to do a better job at that. I mean, there's some places that do it. I'm not saying, I'm not trying to pick on anybody. I'm just saying my experience on campus is a lot of students have questions and they're just afraid to ask them. They might get turned away, or people have already rejected them, okay? But so we want to work through those issues with people. We all struggle with some of these things at some point, hopefully. I assume we are. If you're thinking about your faith at all, you're going to be asking some questions, okay? All right. Now, good news is for you, there's 2 free online resources right there written by Gary Habermas, well-known resurrection apologist. You can read right through those books online. He's got one called Dealing with Doubt, the other one, The Thomas Factor. So I've been sending those links to people for years, and they're really good resources. So go ahead and plow through those, or somebody that needs them. Very, very good resources, free as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the barriers or the challenges to belief today, and some of the limitations of apologetics, how far we can really take people. Well, we all know, hopefully, that obviously there's spiritual barriers that people are already, if they're rejecting the Lord, they're biblically in rebellion. There's a case of spiritual blindness, which the Bible talks about. We already probably know that one. Some people obviously have emotional barriers to Christianity. Sometimes they've been hurt in the past. Definitely people have not treated them well, maybe in the church, or else just personal issues of life. Life itself can be challenging. Sometimes, life hardens us, and we need to realize that people have emotional barriers to faith. Of course, there's intellectual barriers. That has to do with skepticism and evidence and things like that, which we'll talk about tonight. And then, of course, there are volitional barriers. Now, volitional barriers are the case where, have you ever been witnessing to somebody, you've shared the gospel, you've answered their questions, but they're just not willing to take that step of faith and trust Christ. They're not willing to make that decision or commitment. You can't make them make that commitment. That's something the Spirit of God has to do in their life. But obviously some people simply will never take that step, that volitional issue, that will's in the way there, right? So we have to pray and pray that God gives that person a will to step out and trust Him, okay? But these are the kinds of barriers that you're probably going to run into, you already have been running into with people. They come from a variety of backgrounds. People are diverse creatures. And God's made us spiritual creatures. He's made us emotional creatures, intellectual creatures, as well as volitional creatures. That's how we're wired. So you have to kind of sift through with people to see where they're at to find out what the big barrier is to the gospel with them, okay? Now, I bring this up because it's interesting. In Frank Turek's latest book, he talks about an example he had when he does his presentation, and I have seen this myself. He says here at one of his Q&A sessions, I Know Faith to Be an Atheist, that he asks this question. And by the way, this is one of the best questions you could ask somebody, the top paragraph, where he says here, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? That is one of the best questions you can ever ask somebody. I've asked many people that over the years. So he says here in the Q&A session of I Don't Have Faith to Be an Atheist, he says, I asked the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? On several occasions, I've had atheists yell back at me, no. Frank responded, no, wait, you claim to be a beacon of reason, yet when I ask you if something were true, would you believe it? You say no. How is that reasonable? It's not. That's because reason or evidence isn't the issue for such people. They don't have an intellectual objection to Christianity. They have an emotional, moral, or volitional objection. They're not on a relentless pursuit of truth, opening up the evidence where it leads. They're on a happiness quest. Now, not everybody's like that. I'm not saying that Frank's right about every atheist, that it's always an issue of they're going to say no and they have a volitional, moral, or emotional issue. But I will say, from my own experience, I have asked that question to many agnostics and atheists, and some of them had flat out said to me, no, I don't want to be a Christian. So I had, 3 weeks ago, I had a guy tell me, he said to me, well, you know, Jesus never existed. I said, well, if he did exist, and there's good evidence he exists, and he rose from the dead, would you become a Christian? He said, no. So I said, okay, so why do I need to sit here for 3 hours and go over the evidence for the New Testament when you have no interest in becoming a Christian? See, he just, it's kind of, really, that wasn't the issue there. Now, not all people are like this. I mean, there's certainly people who are open and willing to examine any evidence. It just depends on the person. So those things do happen, though. All right, now today we have the problem in our culture, and we have a big problem, and that's the fact that people are asking a question, and as much as we want people to care about actually whether Christianity is true, and you think they want to believe something that's true, in many cases they don't care. And that's because of the impact of postmodernism in our culture, that sometimes people are asking if something's relevant, right? Well, what relevance does God have on my life? I mean, what's he going to do for me? What's he going to do in my life? I mean, he's there to help me, right? So a lot of times people are saying, well, I don't really see the relevance of Christianity. I don't see what relevance God makes in my life, or whether Jesus is the Son of God, and I'm just too busy. I've got things to do. I've got to get a job, make money. I've got to do this, do that. I'm just busy. So what we need to do as Christians is press the issue with people how the existence of God does matter, and why it does make a difference, and why the existence of God impacts these areas of our lives, and these play a role in every area of culture. I mean, to say existence of God doesn't matter is just folly, and it's just ignorance, to be honest. But look at some of the things that the existence of God impacts. It certainly impacts the way you view reality, no doubt about that. It impacts how you view how we got here, our origins. It impacts how you view the world is right now, the problem with it, the human condition, and actually what you're going to do to fix it if you want to care about fixing it. It impacts how you view the human race, where we're headed. It certainly impacts how we view right from wrong, moral questions. It certainly impacts how you view death. And it certainly impacts how you know things. If God is the starting point, then that's going to play a large role in all these areas. So, we have to be able to press people a little harder on, when they simply say, well, it's not relevant. If it's true, it's relevant. The first question is whether it's true. If Jesus really rose from the dead and God exists and Jesus really happens to be his son, your faith does not make that true. Sorry. Your faith does not change this book one iota. This book is either true or it's not true. Either Jesus came 2,000 years ago, so he rose from the dead, or he didn't. I don't care how much faith you have. That doesn't make it true, right? All your faith does is appropriates what's in this book already, okay? Faith doesn't, if I wanted to believe as hard as I could, a Martian was over there in the corner watching this, I could believe it, but that's not going to make it happen, right? So, we have to press people a little harder on the issue of truth. Even though people may be rejecting that, we've got to ask them, What if this is really true? What if this happens to be true? This impacts every area of our lives, okay? Very, very important. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about God's existence, because I think that this is obviously part of the lead question tonight as we go into the next couple of weeks. Well, we need to remember, if you're talking about God's existence with people, my experience over the years is sometimes questions are better than answers. So just because you're learning apologetics, which is helpful, you don't want to always walk around like, well, I've got to get every answer there is before I can talk to someone about the gospel. You won't. That's an impossibility. You'll never learn everything. Life is too short. There's too many resources out there online everywhere now. So, you can learn some of the basics. Like I said, those books, if you read some of those books, you've got enough ammo there to even get going. But in some cases, you're better off asking some questions there. So I'm going to talk about some of the things here about the questions and some of the things I use. Now, this is a tactical issue, I think, which is very helpful when you're talking to people about God, okay? All right. Now, I'm sure that if you've ever talked to people, these are some of the most common objections. I've heard these probably no less than 790,000 times or more. Things like there's no proof for God, there's no evidence for God, we can't know if there is a God or that Jesus is the Son of God, or we do know that God of the Bible doesn't exist and that Jesus is not the Son of God, depending on whether the person floats around from atheism or agnosticism. Some people don't know why they're an atheist or why they're an agnostic. They don't know the difference. Just kind of walk them through that. But you hear a lot of these objections it's very common to hear these, okay? So the best thing to do, in my opinion, that I've done many times, is to back up with a question and ask the person how they define evidence or proof, okay? Because that's really the bottom line issue. When someone says there's no evidence, you've got to get to the issue of what they mean by evidence or what they mean by proof, okay? In many cases, they may not even know what they're asking for, okay? Sometimes, number two, sometimes people think proof means you've got to have some sort of 100% mathematical certainty for God's existence with no objections at all. That's just sometimes the way people think. This hyper, kind of mathematical certainty view. That's how some people view proof. As I said before, you always want to ask them what would convince them Christianity is true. Now, in many cases, what I do, when we start talking about evidence, I ask them, what kind of evidence are you looking for? Gets them to think about how they're approaching the existence of God. Now, what I used to do is just give them an argument right away and say, this is how I know God exists, like that. But now, I'm more or less going to back up and ask them, what kind of evidence are you looking for? What would convince you? Where are you headed with this? Have you ever thought about it? And so these are kind of some of the kinds of common things they say to me over the years, that I've heard over the years. Now, one view, of course, is that God is certainly a supernatural being, and he should be giving me a sign. God exists. He wants everybody to know him. He wants the whole world to know him. Why doesn't he show me a sign or some sort of clear miracle, my life? So the person assumes if God does that, they're going to go like this and say, Jesus, I'm yours. I'm going to take up my cross and follow you right now. I'm giving my life to you. That's what they're assuming, right? If they get that sign. Okay. Well, the problem is, the first question asked, of course, is what do they mean by God when they say God's supposed to give them a sign? Now, if you look in the Bible, it's pretty obvious the God of the Bible is kind of scary. He's certainly a God of love and grace, but when I read some of these passages, when I start looking at God's nature throughout the entire Bible, some passages where he really, obviously, he's very clear, he kind of veils himself where people can't see him directly, right? Because if you see him directly, like in Exodus, it says you'll die. It says that in one passage. It tells you can't see me face to face, can't handle it. So, when someone says that God needs to reveal himself in this kind of supernatural way, I always ask them, tell me what you know about the God of the Bible. What's he like? They don't know. They just don't know. I'm not being critical. They've never thought about it. That's why you want to walk them through it. Remember, in many cases, that God veils himself. He doesn't reveal himself fully because he does know people can't handle being in his presence directly, right? And so that's why he veils himself and appears in certain forms throughout the Old Testament. You see him appear in visions or images. Sometimes he appears as the angel of the Lord. Depends on what you're talking about, what passage. So it's a really good opportunity to really ask people what they mean by that. Now, you can also take this objection, and it's a perfect opening to talk about the gospel, right? Because Jesus is the full revelation of God. So you can ask the person, you can tell them, look, If you want to see God directly, Jesus says, "You see me, you've seen the Father." He's the closest you're ever going to get to God for seeing God directly. That's what he did for us, right? That he came in the world as a man, and that is who God is. He shows us who God is. So let's talk about the claims of Jesus and who he is right now. That's your best bet to wanting to know God directly, to see God directly. But this thing of wanting to see God like in some sort of supernatural sign, like he writes it in the sky, has some real challenges to it. And then the other problem is this, is I always ask them, what would that sign look like? Go ahead and tell me, what would it look like? And then secondly, of course, they could always just rationalize it away. In many cases, I tell people, couldn't you just rationalize it away? Couldn't you say it's a hallucination or something? So these are the kind of questions you want to ask people, because I find most people, once they get that, they think they're going to have that sign. They think they're going to go like this. Once I challenge them on what it means to really bend your knee and follow Christ, they rethink that. They think, well, boy, that's kind of a major commitment there. You're saying that if I believe this thing, that I've got to follow Jesus, like I've got to become a disciple. Yes, eventually. You believe, but then you enter into discipleship. So no, it's not an easy path. This is a walk, a daily walk. They begin to rethink that sign issue pretty quickly. So my point is just challenge them on that a little bit, okay? It's very helpful. Okay. Now, of course, we have the science issue. That's always going to be an issue that people have always thought the existence of God should be proven scientifically. It's been this way for decades. You still have people out there that are going to tell you, well, I need scientific evidence for God's existence. That's because they think that science is a kind of a public thing. It can be tested. It's not personal, experiential. It's not inward, something that you can't see. It's something that has some really testing to it, and they've been told that science is the supreme way of knowing anything. And of course, that dominates college campuses today and just about everywhere as well. So there's some issues with this as well. One of the best things you can do is ask them to define science. I always ask them to define what they mean by science, because if you look at some of the definitions of modern science, obviously science, like right here, it says science defines itself by its effort to explain the physical world of matter and energy. That's one definition. Second one, science is the attempted objective study of the natural world, natural phenomena, whose theories and explanations do not depart from the natural realm. Well, if that's the case, now we got a problem. Is God natural or supernatural? He's supernatural. He's not natural. He's not confined to the natural world. Is God physical? Does God have, is he a material being like this chair here? Like everything you see around me? Is that who God is? Or is he, I can't see God right now, right? The point is, God's not a physical being either, that we can see directly like in science. So if someone's going to say that this is what science is, then we're going to have a real challenge trying to disprove or prove God's existence using the scientific method. So you always want to challenge people is on these issues. You're asking me to give you scientific evidence for God, but yet science is only the study of the natural world, and God's outside the natural world. So what kind of evidence am I going to give you? Okay, because it's already set up that God's not allowed in it. Okay, the scientific endeavor is only a study of natural things. Okay, and then of course God's not physical as well. So that is one way to challenge them on that. Now, having said that, it is true that you also want to ask them what branch of science they're talking about. Do you want to talk about biology, chemistry, astronomy, cosmology, physics? I've seen more than my share of Christian students at Ohio State that are physicists, they're biologists, they're getting degrees in chemistry, neuroscience, all kinds of degrees, and they don't seem to see this huge conflict between their faith and the sciences, like everybody else does. So that's one thing to ask them, but remember one other thing is that there are good scientific arguments for God's existence. I don't want to make it sound like you just have to get out of it and you can't bring up science, but remember some of the first Christians we had, or even some of them were deists, they only believed in a God who created the universe, all believed, who helped modern science, they all believed that God created the universe and the natural laws. They all were involved in some sort of branch of science. That's how modern science got off the ground in the medieval period, was through people that believed in the existence of God. There would be no modern science without them. If you want to read this book called The Genesis of Science, he talks about this, James Hannon. But, we can definitely point to the fact that there's certainly times in history when we didn't have this big conflict that continues to go on today. Okay, they worked in harmony with each other. But the point is, though, if you want to go ahead and deal with somebody on the scientific arguments, I would say if you want to get this book and maybe read it yourself or go through with them, this was Strobel's Case for Creator, but not Case for Christ. This is really a good intro. It has some scientific arguments and only science, and you can talk about these things. He gives the counter objections, talks about, what very, very fair. I felt it was pretty objective for the most part. But, you can go through this book with somebody or talk about it, read it yourself, and work on some of these arguments. But here's the deal. Even if you could prove or show good evidence for God in the sciences, in the natural world, and some of these arguments right here, you could go through these with somebody, go through each one of them. That's not going to get someone all the way to have a relationship with God. It's not going to help them. They're not going to attain salvation through those arguments. They help. They kind of get people out of their skepticism or their agnosticism, but they're not going to get them all the way. And why is that? Because the God you get out of these arguments is not the necessarily, you don't find out about what his character's like. All you find out, okay, there's a creator. There's a designer. There's a designer to create the universe, or a designer somewhere out there. Okay, well, what's that tell me about the designer? Really not very little, except he's kind of very creative and smart and intelligent. But you're going to have to go challenge the person to go deeper and make them realize science is good, but, in the end, it's only going to get you like halfway to God. What you got to do now, you got to go into history. Okay, we got to talk history. We got to ask if God has really shown up somewhere in history, because if God has created the universe, if there's good scientific arguments that the universe is set up a certain way for us to be here, and you're not a chance accident, all those things, you're eventually going to have to look into history and see if God's spoken somewhere, because this is where we find out all the character of God, what God's like in history, in this, right? So we have to ask where God has spoken, somewhere in history. And that's why this always comes up. You ever seen the coexist bumper sticker? This is the opposite one. Contradict. So as obviously we know we want people to coexist. We don't want anyone harming each other over religious beliefs. Of course not. We know logically that there's a lot of religions out there that say God's spoken somewhere in history. Islam says it was in 600 AD or 6 to 650. Of course, Judaism, which that's all Christianity was a Judaism in the first century. But the point is, Judaism believes their core events, the giving of the law, the Torah with Moses. Of course, you have Buddhism, Hinduism. You have all kinds of different faiths that say that our God's spoken somewhere in history, okay? So now you're going to have to deal with the person, ask them, why, where do we really see in history? What has the best evidence, historically speaking, that God's spoken? And that's where we talk about the person of Christ. But we have to be honest with them and show them the claims. Like I was with a girl, I was talking to a girl about a month ago downtown, and I showed her this contradict thing. I had it right on me. I had the pamphlet on me. And she said, well, they're all true. And I said, well, they all have some truth to them. They may have some, I'm not saying they're all completely false, but they all can't be right about Jesus. The Quran says Jesus never died and rose from the dead, and the Bible says he did. So obviously, they're totally contradictory, right? And she said, no, they're both true. And I said, wait a minute. I said, that doesn't make any sense. How can they both be true? They're completely different historical claims, but she wasn't understanding. But, we have to be honest with people and tell them that obviously these all can't be true. They all can't be. I'm not saying all religions don't have any value to them. You can learn from them. It's not that, they're all like, you just don't want to pay attention to them. I'm just saying that the core issue is when it comes to Jesus, they generally all contradict at some level, okay? If you don't believe they contradict, then I don't know what to tell you. Either you don't know what they're saying. We'll talk about this more next week. Either you don't know the claims of each faith, which you need to learn, or else you are worried that if you say one's true, that you're arrogant, okay? It's not arrogance, okay, to say that you believe Jesus is the true path, okay? It's an issue of evidence, all right? If it's evidentially true that he really rose from the dead, he is different. He's not just another guy, okay? And he definitely can't be the same guy that Muhammad talks about, okay? He's totally different, all right? Okay, but we'll talk more about that next week. So the issue is we want to challenge the person to go into history And you want to challenge them to say, look, if you really want to know God exists, these scientific arguments are good, they're helpful, but if you want to really know God and have a relationship with him, you're going to have to wrestle with the person of Christ and whether he really rose from the dead and who he is. And that's why, really, the only way our faith, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, is somewhat falsifiable is the resurrection. You know, he says here, if the dead are not raised, not even Christ has been raised, and if Christ has not been raised, your faith is worthless. You're still in your sins. And those who have fallen asleep in Christ have perished. If we have hoped in Christ in this life only, we are of all men most to be pitied. He's saying, you know, if Jesus is really not risen from the dead, we're dead in our sins. This thing, we're wasting our time proclaiming this thing, right? We're false witnesses. He even says that in that passage if you read on. You know, so you really need to challenge someone on the person of Jesus. That's the issue. And that's a great resource if you want to just start cracking on the resurrection, start learning about the resurrection, the arguments behind the resurrection. That's a really good resource right there. I've had one of the authors 2 times at Ohio State. I think he's going to come back next year and debate a Muslim for me in the spring. Mike Lacone, he's a friend of mine. So I encourage you to get that book, because if you really, the resurrection is pivotal to us being able to explain our faith, okay? All right, now another way, let's see, I'm doing on time here. Oh, I'm running out of time. I'll go quick. Okay, we're going to go really quick. Okay, another way, I got 10 minutes. I'm going to go really quick. Okay, another way we know or we explain God's existence is how we view reality. Now, C.S. Lewis said here, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun is risen. Yep, go back to Lewis' slide. I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun is risen, not only because I see it, but because I see everything else. So basically what Lewis was saying is the way I see reality, God or Christianity explains reality better than anything else. So when you look at some of these big questions, like right here, you know, is God or, you know, no God or nature by itself a better explanation? These are some of the questions that people are always debating. And when you look at things like the origin of the universe or universe being set up for us to be here, or, you know, the DNA information argument, mathematical laws, logical laws, physical, natural laws, consciousness, morality, all these things, God, you know, for Lewis and myself and others, we think that God's a better explanation for those things than no God. Okay? Now, it takes time to learn some of these arguments and go through them. You can get the Strobel book and some of the books I recommend at the beginning. But the point of the matter is that I think Christianity has better, what we might say, it's a better explanation for reality, okay, than no God at all, than answering some of these big questions, okay? Another thing is what we call existential arguments. Now, you guys probably know that our culture is very emotional these days. People are very emotionally driven. That's why it's hard to kind of sometimes have like just a cordial conversation with them, maybe rational discourse, because sometimes the emotions get in the way. As I said, emotions aren't a bad thing. It's just that, you know, some people are very wired in that way. But, you know, this book right here is another way of approaching the existence of God, and that's the fact that some people believe in God. Doesn't even do with logic or reason or any of these logical reasons. It has to do more with an emotional need. Okay, and some people find truth that way. And so, you know, you're always going to run into people like that. So you may want to work through some of the existential arguments, such as why we hear, purpose, meaning, those things like that, those emotional needs. You know, people are going to be driven in that direction, okay? Like, for example, let's give an example of this quote right here, not a really uplifting quote. Let's look at the most famous atheist of the last 30 years, what he said. Humans have always wondered about the meaning of life. Life has no higher purpose than perpetuate the survival of DNA. Life has no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. That's a winner. So, you know, Dawkins really, this is his view of life, and some people read that and they're like, you know, that just does not existentially fulfill me. That is so, that's just so, makes me depressed. Well, it makes sense. Not only is it evidentially problematic, there's not good evidence for what he's saying, but also it just doesn't really resonate with people. Like, you know, that doesn't give me any purpose, that worldview. That, I mean, even if it's like I said, there's evidence problems behind evidential problems, but it doesn't satisfy them, okay? And so that's why a lot of people are like, nah, not my cup of tea, okay? And so, let me go back. And so this is probably one of the dominating views of humanity. And yes, I have had many students and people over the years tell me this is how they view how they got here. I've showed this diagram to them, and they say, yep, that's me. This is what some people believe. Many people believe this. This is how you got here. Number one, the laws of physics for our present universe arose by chance from a multitude of possible universes. First terms of light developed by chance arising from primordial soup combinations resulted from the laws of physics plus accidents. And the first concept of light developed purely by chance, genetic mutations, environmental randomness, and humans evolved by more improbable occurrences. That is the view that's taught on college campuses, and that is the view that many people believe in. Not everybody, but it certainly is a view that's out there of how we got here. So some people find that to be existentially not satisfying, and other people say not only is it evidentially wrong, but it's existentially unsatisfying as well, okay? Now, this is probably the most, I'd say right now, the way people come to believe in Christianity or anything else, this is the number one thing that I have seen increase over the years. And I would say churches are having to see this as well, and just everybody. People are asked, okay? Pragmatic benefit or pragmatism is a belief that says something's true if it works for you. It has practical results, okay? Someone might look at the life of Rob Mitchell, put him on the spot, and say, you know, I've watched his life for a couple months, 3 months, a year, and man, this really makes a difference in his life. I've been watching him live this thing out, and he claims to be a Christian, and I want what he's got. And so they ask him about it, and he gets to share the gospel with them, which is fine. But for the same token, how many of us are really getting people to come up to us and say, what makes you tick? I like to see that happen. It has happened, but it's not all the time. And we need to understand that there's a lot of other options out there if you just want to try something out, see if it works, okay? I can think of people that believe in other things, other religions, because it works for them. It's practical, it makes a difference, it helps them have a stronger family. For example, if you've ever talked to Mormons, lovely people. I ask them, why do you believe Mormonism? Why are you Mormon? They say, well, it's helped me with my family, and it helps me live a moral life, and it makes a difference in my life. Oh, okay, well, I guess that makes Mormonism true. I mean, you know. Or Islam. I've run into people who came to Islam in prisons. They became Muslims in prison. They said it's helped me to be more responsible. Okay, well, does that mean Islam's true? So the first question we want to ask is what you believe in really based in reality? Okay, what's based in reality will work. Okay, there's nothing wrong with wanting somebody to make a difference, but if we're only going to judge a religion or a faith by having practical results or what works, then you've got a lot of options out there other than Christianity people are going to run to, okay? What happens when God doesn't answer their prayer? Well, it doesn't work. I'm going to go try Buddhism now, okay? Of course, that's a discipleship issue, but the point is that I see probably 80% of people today asking me, saying to me, what difference does this make in my life? I don't see the difference Jesus makes. Why should I believe this? What difference does it make? First question you want to ask them is, what if it happens to be true? What if Jesus really rose from the dead and he turns out to be the Son of God? If it's really true, then you need to be reconciled back to God, okay? And everything flows out of that from there. Yes, you'll see a difference in your life. You should. Of course, that happens with discipleship, practical discipleship and growing, things like that, growth. But the point is that we've got to challenge people, take them back to that issue of truth. Now, I know that may be hard, and some people say, well, I try that with people, it doesn't work, they don't care if it's true. Look, if you want to believe something, you know, that's a total lie and build your whole foundation on it and follow it wholeheartedly, you can go for it, okay? I talk to people, I've run into just as committed people that are Mormons and Muslims all the time. I had a Mormon tell me 3 weeks ago, she said, I'm a Mormon because I saw these people out on the campus evangelizing, they're so aggressive, they're out there all the time, this must be true. They're out there, look how committed they are, this must be true. Look they're out talking to people all the time, must be true. That's the reason she's a Mormon. I've had Muslims tell me that Islam has helped them become a more responsible person. Okay, so these are the kinds of things you're dealing with. And then one last thing, I just want to define faith. We have a large problem with that issue as well. Remember, faith is not something that is like a blind leap of faith. Biblically speaking, this is a good definition. It's to consider something to be true and worthy of one's trust, to entrust oneself to an entity in complete confidence, okay? That's kind of one definition, but it's fairly correct. So we want to realize faith is trust, okay? We want to be challenging people to realize trust, trust, trust. We want to take them back to trust because that word faith is kind of misunderstood a lot in today's culture, okay?